Hi, I'm Dove.
Hello, I'm Daniel, and welcome to Post-Exertional Mayonnaise. Thank you for being here. We haven't had an episode for 2 or 3 weeks because I got COVID, which was a bit frustrating. But I'm getting there now. Hopefully I'm back or starting to get back to my baseline again. So yeah, how are you?
Yeah, Dan's had COVID, and we've been having serious technical problems. Also, heat wave here in Massachusetts, and flooding, but that's not apparently what caused all the technical problems. So this is our seventh time trying to begin, and we're both a little. I'm schwitzing. I'm like so hot. I'm
Yeah,
melting, and yeah, so Dan is getting over COVID, so it'll be interesting to see how we do today.
yeah. We're just gonna take it easy, I think, aren't we? Because we've had multiple issues, and we're talking about magical thinking today. And
Yeah,
I just joked to Dov, it almost seems like there's something that's trying to prevent us to talking about this.
yeah.
But not that.
Speaking of
Yeah,
magical thinking, speaking of magical thinking, there's some kind of supernatural creature um who thinks that we should not do our podcast today. It says a brain that is wired to for I guess that's I grew up with to put it mildly, I grew up with some magical thinking, and I believe that would definitely be um would be one way or the way that this would get narrativized
yeah, yeah, definitely.
by the
Um,
place where I came from.
mm, yeah. Um, so, oh, should we talk about our website?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
you've worked really hard on setting up a website, and it's brilliant, and I'm really chuffed with it, and you've done a great job. So, do you want to just say a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, we are very lucky that we got the URL pempod.com, so it's very easy to remember. And yeah, I mean, we're trying to make the podcast accessible on there, as well as the poetry. We're trying to make sort of galleries of art for people who are guests on the show. So we're trying to link to all the guests, to me and Dan as hosts, and also to have links to the poetry. And I'm still kind of trying to figure out the a way to make all the information as accessible as possible, but we're working on it. And yeah, we're excited about it. And there's even a page for the strange symptoms or weird symptoms. I keep forgetting which we're calling it, because some people call it strange and some people call it weird, to the point where I think I started it as
I
strange
think it's
symptoms,
weird.
which are symptoms that people get that they're not sure if anyone else has. People with ME get symptoms, they're not sure if anyone else has them. So we're calling them strange symptoms, and if people want to like scroll in there and look for the symptoms. But just a reminder, we are not here for any kind of like diagnosis, treatment. We're here just to connect and to socially connect, and in that way support each other as people in the world with ME/CFS and other chronic illness. So
Mm.
yeah,
No, I just think the website looks brilliant, and I think it looks very professional. It looks like, yeah, you've clearly put a lot of work into it, and it's brilliant. So well done. And yeah, it's
thanks, Dan.
pempod.com. It's absolutely fantastic that we've got such an easily kind of like rememberable, is that a word?
Yeah, it
Website
should be if
address.
it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Oh, on the website, I have a list of resources of like books and websites and stuff, and they're not all totally vetted. Like a lot of them are, but I haven't read every single book on there. So please feel free to drop me a line if you'd like me to add anything, or if you'd like me to kind of look into something that you think shouldn't be on there, stuff like that. And definitely always contact us about anything you want related to the podcast. I have to say that somebody did contact me to let me know they did not like the word mayonnaise in the title. And I know we're not going to be able to be all things to all people, but we're keeping the word mayonnaise in the title because we like it. We also today, in one of our previous iterations of trying to do the podcast, thought of like other like post-exertional Marmite, but like kind of the way that no matter what we use, if it's a food, someone's gonna be kind of maybe not super happy about that. So we're doing the best we can, and we know not everybody loves mayonnaise, and we apologize if mayonnaise is a food that makes you unhappy. And but we're just trying to, we're trying to be a little absurdist in the title, and we like it. And we definitely don't think you should eat mayonnaise if you don't want to. And we also know that sometimes you have visceral reactions to foods. So, but
We're
we
not
also, yeah,
proselytizing for mayonnaise
yeah,
eating or anything like that. In fact, the podcast has got nothing to do with mayonnaise whatsoever. It's just
right.
it's just a staff name. And somebody did message me this week and say that they somebody who hopefully might come on in the future and be a guest, said that they loved the name. So yeah, you win some, you lose some. So
Yeah.
yeah, if you don't like the name, just try and ignore it. But yeah.
I prefer mustard, to be fair, but I think post-exertional mayonnaise sounds much better than post-exertional mustard. On a
It,
sandwich, I want mustard. For the podcast, I'd like mayonnaise.
it just rolls off the tongue somehow, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's so our website's up. Go and have a look. All the episodes are there, and will be there sort of going forwards. So yeah, weird symptoms. We've got one from Christina, and last time we did a podcast, I knew that there was somebody that had contacted us about Dov's previous query about virtual visual memory loss. And should I just read this one? Um, Christina says, Dov, you asked about virtual memory loss. In my case, it's a very persistent symptom, which has got drastically worse over the years. And now it's a word I call catastrophical. I used to remember things visually, like what the building looks like what color what color it is, etc. But now I cannot. I find it extremely difficult putting names to faces as well. My concentration has gone downhill drastically, and it is very difficult living this way. End of August, I'll be seeing a new neurologist, and I'm hoping that I get some medication which might help. If anyone has a suggestion, I'd be very grateful. Um, she says symptoms of ME, which I'm not sure others have: burning skin, feeling like sunburn, more prominent on the arms, but all over the body. Sounds unpleasant. She says, um, uh, this sounds like a really uncomfortable one. She says, I know I need to urinate. When I try, nothing happens, so I have to push as if I have got constipation. Sometimes I have to push extremely hard, and then I can urinate. This doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's very difficult. So yeah, just odd ones. Um,
Can I jump in for a sec
yeah,
and
go
say,
for it.
yeah, so I, a couple of weeks ago or a couple episodes ago, talked about the fact that I've lost access to most of my visual memory. Like, my head is basically sort of like um, black empty space. When I try to access a memory, sometimes I can sort of glimpse it for a vague second, but mostly I've kind of lost access to visual memory, though I do know it's there because I do have memory, and I think I wouldn't have memory if there wasn't a sort of visual memory mechanism somewhere, but I can't access it. And that's since I've had ME, and a couple other people have sort of responded to that and said they've had similar things. And Christina has now said that, is it Christina or
Yeah,
Christine? Christina.
Christina. Yeah,
And hmm?
Christina. Yeah.
Yeah, and also Christina, I do get a sun. I don't get a sunburn feeling, but I do get sometimes this feeling like the sun is shining on my skin. Like I have this weird warmth that feels exactly like sun shining on my skin, and I do get weird patches of like skin that feels burnt and bruised. Um, so I don't know if that's similar either. And I also can relate to I've heard that, like, I don't know if this is true. I have heard people say that your bladder muscles weaken with ME. I don't know if that's true, but I also definitely have to often feel like I have to pee and it doesn't happen. Like there's nothing. Anyways, I have some weird bladder stuff too, and I actually think that I have heard other people say that they have similar stuff. So you're definitely not alone. But we would love to hear from you with any of these weird symptoms, just to know if other people have the same or similar experiences.
Yeah. We've got one from Kirsty, and she says, "Hey, Pam Podcast 23." And on Twitter, she says that she has a weird symptom. Sounds very weird, to be honest. When I have overexerted myself or eaten something that triggers inflammation, I get tiny lumps that appear in my abdomen. I can't say abdomen, under my skin. I think it's lymph node activation, but not sure. Had it at early onset, and now after my more severe relapse after the AZ jab in 2021 comes and goes, feels like gristle, and sometimes can be painful and coincide with rib pain. So yeah, I've not heard of that one, but if anybody else kind of experiences kind of like, particularly obviously when it's a sort of flare up, inflammation in particular, little lumps under the skin. So yes, sounds uncomfortable
Yeah.
or just frustrating.
Um, yeah, we would love to hear from from anybody who has similar symptoms. I think it's really somehow, I think it's comforting to kind of know that you're not alone in these symptoms. And also sometimes I think other people might have knowledge or information that could help us understand them better. I used to have rosacea, and that could feel like my face was burnt. I wonder if other people experience rosacea as feeling sort of like sunburn on the face, but I don't think I've had it. I think it's just a face thing, but I'm not sure. Is
Hmm.
rosacea just something
I'm
that
not
happens
sure.
on your face? Does anyone? I don't actually know. And I think for me, um, it's improved a lot with. I tried to treat SIBO symptoms, and that's sort of improved the rosacea a bit, though I still do get weird feelings of like sun on my face. But
Mm,
anyways, um, strange symptoms, weird symptoms. I'm trying to keep up with this on the website too. So if you want to go check there, we'll have a lot of this stuff there as well, if that'll help sort of um, with processing the information and responding, or just referencing it. Um, and again, I think I've said this, but I don't remember if I said this here or in one of the other 7 times we tried to make the podcast. We are not trying to diagnose or treat anything. We're just trying
mm,
to share our experiences and connect. So
definitely. Should we get on to our main topic just before we
sure,
have any other sort of technical issues that sort of prevent us from talking
yeah,
about this?
yeah.
Um,
Any more? No more demons. Uh, Getting in the way of our podcasts.
yeah,
Podcast
um,
demons, is that a thing?
podcast demons. Yeah, possibly. I don't know.
Which is a
Yeah,
good segue to Carrie Poppy.
yeah. Do you want? Should I? So should I see if I can play the clip that we got? Carrie
Yeah, do you
Poppy.
want to play it? Like, can we play it while we're talking, or is it something that you would sort of splice in some
Well,
way? I don't.
I can screen share. So hopefully this
Okay.
will work. Boom, boom, boom. Yeah,
Yeah, so the
just
topic is magical thinking, and Carrie Poppy. Dan found a clip of Carrie Poppy sort of talking about um, narrativizing illness, the way people can sort of um, I don't want to say force, but I can't think of another word, but force think certain kinds of thinking about narrativizing illness. I'm not saying that well, but just to give a tiny bit of context for this video, Dan found this video by Carrie Poppy where she's talking about
Mm,
it's sort of like planting evidence retroactively,
mm,
sort of. So
mm. Yeah, she's writing a book about challenging some of the kind of current trends around, especially on social media, around trauma and the impact of trauma, because there's a sort of massive industry around trauma and how it affects us, and it's not to say that there's not some substance in that, but I think she's looked particularly at how a lot of especially like social media influencers have kind of really latched onto this and then sort of gone overboard in terms of like anything that is wrong with you then is linked to sort of past trauma, and that's not
right,
always necessarily the case. So I'll see if I can
right.
share
Can
this.
we? Do you want to, after the clip, we'll break that down a bit more?
Mm,
The sort of context of maybe ways that it makes sense to talk about trauma and illness and ways that it doesn't, in
yeah.
terms of yeah, for lack of better words.
Um, okay, I mentioned the ACEs study, retrospective bias. I just want to give a little shout out to that concept here. So retrospective bias is a problem that is identified in large scale studies where, like the ACEs study, where we're looking at a group of people and we're asking them about their lives in the past. And we say, okay, let's say group of people with diabetes. Growing up, did you eat junk food a lot? Okay, so people who are experiencing something currently in their life, they do something called seeking after meaning. And this is a scientifically validated psychological phenomenon. We tend to look for a reason we do the things we do. And we don't usually look to things like genetics, to things like a lack of education about how to handle our internal lives. That's so boring. So instead, we look for these events, these little markers in our life that will explain it. And so when you ask someone who is currently suffering with something to look backward in their life and tell me, were you ever traumatized? You have a much higher likelihood of them saying yes, even though if we did that study prospectively, we might not have determined that they experienced trauma. And so this has been studied extensively. People with chronic pain, especially, if they know they are in a study about chronic pain, which they probably will, and you ask them nearly any question about their prior life that they could cognitively connect to their chronic pain, they will say yes. Or they're more likely to say yes than the average person because they're trying to explain this awful experience. I get migraines, which is chronic pain syndrome. I get this. I get this. Like, when you are incapacitated with pain, you just want to know why so you can do anything the hell about it, right? Um, and this is, in in my view, it's sort of a cruel thing to do to someone, to say, well, maybe it was your past, like maybe you were mistreated in some way you've never appreciated. Oh man. And again, if that sends you into depression is a risk factor for chronic pain, so you may actually be making the situation worse.
So, so yeah, so Carrie Poppy is I forget the word. What does she call it? Perspective bias, or it's where it's
Was it
like
retrospective?
retrospective bias. So our topic today is magical thinking, and um, I guess to start off, I just want to say that, like, I'll speak for myself. I'll say that I fully understand why people turn to magical thinking to try to understand and have a sense of control over a devastating illness, because it's hard and it's scary and doctors aren't helping us. And I think there's this feeling of loneliness, helplessness. There's an absolute devastating fundamental lack of social and economic support. So it makes sense that a lot of people sort of turn to magical thinking as a way to cope with illness. But in the end, my belief is that it does a lot more harm than good, and we're gonna unpack that a bit. But I want to start by just sort of saying that we can all look to our past and find trauma, and some people have extreme and extensive, complex PTSD. You can have complex PTSD and not have a devastating chronic illness. And you can have complex PTSD and have a devastating chronic illness. And I think what one thing that we want to clarify is that um, generally speaking, there are a whole host of complex um, potentialities that lead people to have chronic illness. And I kind of made a list on my own of things that I think are part of the stew, and that would be genetic factors, environmental factors. And environmental factors can mean like you grew up somewhere where there's chemicals that cause cancer or cause chronic illness. It can also mean you grew up in an environment where you didn't have medical support, and so medical conditions went untreated. It could mean a whole host of things, but there's environmental factors, there's biological factors, by which I mean bacterial infections, viral infections, other like immune system issues. So there's genetic, biological, environmental, random shit that we don't even know about. I think I'm missing some things, but stress and trauma can definitely make us more vulnerable to illness. But I don't believe that they're ever the sole factor in illness. And even if they were, treating those wouldn't mean that you could just fix your illness. So I really worry, because I think when people use this kind of like retroactive bias and say you're sick because of trauma or you're sick because of other magical thinking factors, it puts a lot of blame on sick people, and it also gives us a false sense of hope that we can fix it if we fix this thing. So that's my initial kind of um, rambling about it. Dan, what are your thoughts?
No, yeah, I mean, I think just that list that you put on our notes, just to clarify what is magical thinking in relationship to chronic and other kinds of illness, and I think I think that's great in terms of what you said. A belief that illness can be controlled, cured, or fixed if someone just tried harder, tried such and such, usually alternative treatment, tried such and such diet, had the right attitude, engaged in particular activities, gardening, yoga, and yeah, you've got that spot on. It's always the sense that have you tried this? Have you tried that? Somebody contacted me early on in my illness to say that they'd been really helped by the lightning process. I don't know if you've heard of that, Dov. It's particularly something that's over here in the UK, and it's I think it's maybe similar to a form of CBT, but it's a very secretive sort of thing that you have a personal practitioner that helps you. You have to pay quite a lot of money, and from what I understand, it's almost the equivalent of standing on a bit of paper and going around in circles and basically telling yourself that you believe that you're better. So
Oh, God.
it's almost like the power of belief, and
Ugh.
this was one of the things that was actually outlined in the new NICE guidelines as something that shouldn't be used for people with ME. So all these sort of things. I'm going back to when I had childhood ME, and my mum was so desperate to to see if there was something that could help. I remember going for homeopathy, and that's another one of these things that potentially falls into this sort of bracket of magical thinking, because it's kind of like using very small amounts of something to try and treat something, and it's diluted right down, diluted right down, diluted right down. And just from a logical point of view, how can something that's kind of diluted down at such nth degree help in that way? I went to see somebody who did some pendulum dowsing. So it was sort of lay on a bench or whatever, and had this gemstone or whatever it was. I don't even know what it was. Just hang. I was probably like
Yeah.
11, 12 at the time, hanging over me and sort of swinging it in to see if that would help. And looking back
Yeah,
now,
I have,
it sort of feels absurd, really. But I understand why people latch onto these things as anything that might be sort of helpful in sort of tackling the problem. But I think ultimately it comes down to this sort of battle of the psychologization of ME and chronic illnesses that has done huge damage to to create a stigma for those of us that are living with these conditions, um, to try and make sense of it, when actually we're living with a highly complex systemic kind of uh, chronic illness that's clearly biological. And yeah, there may be things that, like you say, stress adds to that sort of process of the body being kind of worn down. But certainly to sort of suggest that the trauma is the source of everything that's gone wrong, and then how do we actually then fix that problem? Then if it is trauma, then okay, we might acknowledge the trauma and get therapy or whatever, and work through that, but it still doesn't sort of solve the very real physical issues that we're going through. Um, yeah, it's a challenge, isn't it, to try and work your way through these sort of problems in your mind, because when we are living with ME, we're already living with that stigma, and then having to try and navigate that, and actually um, discover a sense of our own selves and our own confidence in who we are, and and what's going on with our bodies, when we're almost tricked into thinking that there's, we just need to sort out whatever's psychologically wrong with us, when actually for most of us there's not an issue with depression or mental health issues necessarily, but often those mental health issues come as a result of living with ME, and
right,
that's the flip side to it, that actually, and then living with the stigma of of the condition as well is a
right.
real challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that there's this kind of problem of the external world, like people. I think like people outside of us, people who are not chronically ill or who are chronically ill but able to function and take care of themselves and like have a sense of triumph in some way, or like that they're better than us, somehow think that that makes them experts, and somehow think that like, the people. I remember there was this once when I was on Twitter years ago. There's this list of things that people were writing, absurd suggestions people had made um, to fix their ME, and it was like vinegar, yoga, um, past life shit, uh, hypnosis. One of them was literally like walking around with potatoes on your feet. Um, I had somebody to my face tell me I was sick because of a karma problem. I had somebody tell me that um, I would get better if I gardened. I had, I mean, I've had people. So the list was endless. The list of things that people told people with ME would fix their ME, and then the list of things that people have just said to me is also quite long. Which is, I think people, generally speaking, I think people are taught to fear chronic illness in a very particular way. And this actually might be a good time to read one of the quotes by Laurie Edwards, who wrote In the Kingdom of the Sick. Let me see if I can here. Do you mind if I read a few of those quotes?
No, go for it. Yeah, they're brilliant.
Okay. Um, Without that finish line that denotes survivorship, there is not the same level of cultural awareness or acceptance of our diseases. No, and she's talking about chronic illness here. No backdrop of success with which outsiders can judge our journey. Our survival is more subtle and nuanced. It entails adaptation and negotiation, and it is as fluid as our disease progression and symptoms are. So that's one quote. Here's another. The fact that you're just not going to get better seems unbelievable to most people, I guess, says Melissa McLaughlin. One frustration for her is people who can't understand that patients cannot control or fix everything. Quote, it's easier for them to believe that there is something you can control. There must be something you can do that you aren't doing. Eating raw foods, forcing yourself to exercise, thinking your way out of it, trying the latest drugs that promise a cure in their commercial. Something should work, and if you're not better, then you're not working hard enough. It's frustrating, it's everywhere, and it's just wrong. And then I'll just read one more quote from her. It says, unless someone has lived with chronic pain or lived with someone who suffers from it, it can be difficult to imagine something can cause significant pain nearly around the clock. That's improbable to many people. People assume patients are just complaining too much, not trying their best to get better. Dr. Sarah Whitman says lack of understanding from physicians is both an individual and an institutional problem. So there's this kind of systemic failure to sort of accept and acknowledge and believe that chronic illness exists and it's debilitating and or causes disability. And so people, instead of just like accepting that and acknowledging that, I think try to feel a sense of protection for themselves by creating a scenario in which they feel they would, if they were in the same situation, be able to make themselves better. So when it's coming from outside of ourselves, I think it's often people like it's almost a strange magical sense of protection. Like if I just like if I got sick, I wouldn't get that sick. I would be able to get better because I would do these things. And then they sort of project that onto us. And I think it's based in fear and a desire for control. Dan, thoughts?
Yeah, no, and I think for me, coming from like a Christian background, and I understand that faith can be like really important and really helpful for people to have a sense of hope. But there's also a lot of toxic things surrounding that that often maybe if prayer hasn't worked, then it's not overtly said necessarily, but if prayer hasn't worked, then it's due to a lack of faith. Or early on in my illness, I went into a prayer tent and explained that I was ill. It was an event, and then I was asked if I had any unforgiveness, and that maybe I hadn't forgiven somebody, and like you said, it's almost like or I hadn't forgiven myself for something. So it's almost like tagging on this sort of psychological element to something in relation to chronic illness, particularly in ME. That there's some sort of blockage, or I had I had conversations with a therapist who had almost similar views, but not in a religious way. But there's things from your past that kind of need unlocking or whatever in that sense to try and open up, some sort of recovery. And it's not that I don't disagree with that there is some sort of connection in terms of mind, body, and when we're stressed, it can have raise our heart rate. It can cause us to crash out. So for me, I try and keep sort of stress levels as low as possible. So I do understand that there is that sort of mind body connection, but going back to the video from earlier that Carrie said, that the fact that people like to trauma hunt, and hunting for traumas that explain the reason why we're ill, and sometimes there isn't an explanation in that sense, and to say that actually you haven't forgiven somebody, so therefore you're ill, it's adding a sort of supernatural element on top of what is actually just a very sort of complicated physical thing that's going on in your body, that's actually not provable. There's no sort of basis or scientific sort of anything. It's just it comes out of this sort of sense of we can't. Well, actually, there's nothing we can do about this, so we're going to sort of like put a supernatural label on an illness, and it's just rubbish. But it also makes you feel very helpless, and can feel very patronizing as well, as if to say, well, you need to forgive somebody in order to move on, or for there to be some sort of
Yeah, I can say that. Well, first of all, forgiveness is not a concrete thing. Forgiveness is a concept that's very fluid. And so for people to just be like, you have to forgive to get better, doesn't acknowledge the fact that, like, forgiveness isn't something that you just do and then it's done and then it's fixed and then you're fixed. And more than that, boy, do I know a lot of people who are angry at a lot of people who aren't sick at all. And,
yeah.
you know, you can be really fucking angry at a lot of people for a lot of things and not have ME. And you can be somebody who's like mostly just angry at, you know, the whole idea of CBT and GET and magical thinking, and you think it's bullshit, and maybe that's mainly what you're angry about, for example. I mean, you know, I'm being a little silly here, but you cannot have like be walking around with sort of rage at everyone, and you can have ME, and you know, so it's like, I think that it's judgy, it's holier
Yeah.
than thou, and
Yeah.
self-righteous, and it's based on nothing concrete or in any way reliable. And you know, I think, you know, I have a friend who, you know, literally told me that her grandmother got cancer because she was emotionally stuck. That being emotionally stuck gave her grandmother cancer. And, you know, I've never sat down with her and sort of asked her, you know, do you think everyone who gets cancer because they're emotionally stuck? Like, what about people who get cancer when, because they are, um, have been exposed to toxins and they live in an area where lots of people are getting the same cancer? Do you believe that they're still sick because they're emotionally stuck? It's like, if you have this sort of temerity and the self-righteousness to think you know why people got sick, and it's because of this one clear, simple, not simple, but simple thing, like because they didn't work through something or they didn't forgive someone, like, are you applying that to everyone in every situation? Or do you just think you know this about certain people, even though you're not their doctor? You know, it's like, I think a lot of people say this stuff without thinking through the implications of what they're saying, which is that I am judging someone. I think have the expertise to judge why someone got sick, and therefore I have the expertise to judge people and judge why you got sick. You know, it's like, I don't know that she understands that when she says that, that means that I'm sitting there wondering, so do you think I'm sick because I'm, quote, emotionally stuck? And like, you know, who the fuck is anyone to say that? And like, I mean, it's arrogant and it's self-righteous, but it's also like absurd because, you know, I have an entire history. I have, you know, a genetic profile. I have, a history of infection. I have, a whole complicated life and world and biological situation. And, this person is not my doctor. And so for them to like try to narrow down illness to one cause, and to think that that they know people and they know illness well enough to kind of pinpoint that cause. I think I think people mean well when they do this. And I think that they do it out of fear. Not everybody means well. I think some people mean well, and some people think that they're really gonna help you. I think some people are just kind of assholes and don't want to think of the complexities of illness and the kind of support people need. I think some people just want to sort of cut themselves away from any situation where somebody, needs any kind of long-term support, and they don't want anything to do with that. But I think some people, do really mean well and do really think that they can help you. But in the end, what they're doing is hurting you, because they're imagining they have expertise that they don't have. They're judging and they're giving false hope. And, hope is another sort of topic we wanted to address a bit today, because hope is not this wonderful thing that is good for everyone. And hope with ME is actually a very complicated thing and a potentially harmful and dangerous thing, depending how it is sort of applied and conceived and used. And yeah, so sorry, I went on, and now I kind of lost track. But
no,
thoughts?
it's fine, because I think the two things do link, because there's this sort of whenever we try something that might fall into that category of magical thinking, it is because we have the hope that we want to have a different life, and like you said earlier, that we can sort of attach onto things and think, okay, this might work, and actually, things like, I know one thing that's been talked about quite a lot recently is like nicotine patches and vagal nerve stimulation, those sort of things, and actually maybe some of those things do help, and we try them because we do hope that we maybe see some sort of improvement, but it's so hard to find that psychological balance, emotional balance for ourselves, that sort of places us into a place where we're not totally skeptical about absolutely everything, and become quite bitter, but at the same time kind of remain realistic about our condition, and finding a way to be emotionally healthy is like really difficult when we're not physically healthy. And
Can
I
I
know
jump
even
in
just
for a
recently
sec?
sorry.
Oh, I just can I jump in for 1 sec, or did you
Yeah,
want to
go on.
finish that? I was just
Oh,
gonna say, like,
yeah,
yeah,
you go.
um, I know a lot of people with chronic illness who have spent years where their entire focus is trying to get better. They've tried every fucking thing you can imagine, everything in the book. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and wiped themselves out of money. And all they've done is gotten tired and broke and, unhappy and, um, like tried everything imaginable. And I know for me that pretty much everything I've tried except for low dose naltrexone, which has helped some of my pain, has actually done me more harm than good. Like I've tried so many medications that have been suggested, and they've actually all made me feel worse. And I got to a point like around 2 years into ME where I was just like, I'm not going to try most things. And I'm going to be very careful about what I try, because I know it may make me worse. And what I'm going to try to do is find a way to like have the best quality of life I can and accept that I have this illness. And that's actually like made my life so much better, is just sort of trying to stay in the moment, stay in the day, appreciate the things that I can. And I know that part of the reason that I'm able to have a good quality of life is, at least at this point, like I am I have a home of my own. I have an environment that's manageable in terms of sensory information. And, I have my basic needs met. And for a lot of people with ME, that's not true. So I know that I'm really lucky that my basic needs are met. I'm mostly in bed, I'm mostly homebound. And my quality of life from an outside perspective is probably like little to none, but I actually I enjoy the social time I do get to have, though I pay a price for it. And I am able to enjoy my life as long as I keep my, kind of rest and stay realistic. And so for me, that's actually been the thing that's made my life most manageable is like acceptance and and rest and appreciation for what I am able to have. And I know that that's not true for everyone, and that my quality of life is a lot better than a lot of other people with this illness. Dan, sorry I interrupted you.
No. It's a funny thing because I kind of like emotionally, I tend to sort of feel like I swing from one end of the spectrum to another in the sense that when I'm doing a little bit better, I can feel quite hopeful and I probably get ahead of myself and I think, oh, I'm having a better day. Maybe I can do this or maybe I can do that. And then when I'm feeling really rough, I mean, with the COVID recently, I felt so ill that, I mean, it was hard to kind of like really establish how bad the COVID symptoms were or how much the exhaustion was like ME or where the two things started and ended. But I just felt very frustrated and really low emotionally and, um, you know, not in any way sort of suicidal, but like philosophizing about death and things like that, and like because it is so difficult and the exhaustion and so it's a really difficult balance because um finding that sort of middle ground of acceptance, which kind of is not easy because I do want a better life. I do rage against it sometimes. I feel angry and I feel bitter and I feel very frustrated that actually I've lost my career that I worked so hard for so long, and I can't do the things with my family that I want to do. I can't give them the life that I want to give them with me. Um, so yeah, so there's a level of anger and frustration, but at the same time, I have to carry that lightly and not not let it kind of not let the bitterness take over because then I get grumpy and I don't like being grumpy either because it's not who I am as a person. So it's somehow trying to find a middle ground between sort of not letting the bitterness and the frustration about the illness get too overwhelming, but sort of just trying to hold back on the hopefulness as well because um, when we hope too much or when I hope too much, that's when you get the disappointment and maybe that sort of like leads in quite nicely to the email from Rachel. I don't know. Did you want to
Yeah,
read
do you
some
want
of
to
that?
read that?
I could read it if you want. So Rachel, who wrote the poem that we had the other week, that was all about sort of space and time and things, was fantastic. Which you can find on our channel. She's written a little bit about hope. To me, the popular idea of hope as a future-oriented wish for something to be different is akin to the other ills in Pandora's basket, not the outlier. When I place my hopes on a specific outcome in the future, it takes me away from the present moment and sets me up for potential disappointment or devastation if it doesn't happen. This was my experience in early illness, when I was focused on recovery and kept hoping the next doctor or treatment or supplement, etc., would be the thing that finally made me better. It kept me in this passive wish for life to be other than it was, for my body to do other than it could, and place my well-being in an uncertain future beyond my control. That kind of hope, whether it's for recovery or a better house or the great romantic partner, is conditional, based on something out there that once reached or attained would surely mean life is better. And in my experience, that kind of narrow hope isn't just painful internally, it can be weaponized. I remember well-meaning doctors or friends telling me I had to stay hopeful about recovery, that if I didn't believe it could happen, it wouldn't. So in those early years, when I felt despondent after some new treatment failed to cure me, I felt like I was failing too, failing to be hopeful enough. Turns out it was abandoning this kind of hope that allowed me to come into the right relationship with a kind of hope that I find inhabitable. Not the passive wish for a tree that bears fruit, but an inner seed of possibility. The recognition that things can and will change, and that changes or grows is in part dependent, and that what changes or grows is in part dependent on what I'm tending to. Instead of placing my hopes on a vague sense of things getting better, I place my hope in the only thing that has ever brought about change, what is happening and can be done in the present. It's about reclaiming my agency. I want a hope that starts where I am, stays open to the reality of how things are, and asks how and what might I nourish in this moment. For me, hope no longer means I orient towards the goal of recovery or finally getting better, but towards what I can do now to live into a better life. Hope not as something I have and can therefore lose, but more as something I cultivate. The practice of aligning my heart with what's most important to me and engaging my energy to move towards it in the ways that I can. Living what I'm living, what's my hope or vision for the future? What are my current resources? What's actually possible? What can I do today that will move me in the direction I want to travel, however incremental? What happens in the future is beyond my control, but this new kind of hope reminds me I still have an influence. And it's that kind of word, incremental, I think, that is so important, isn't it? In that it's what can I control within what I'm experiencing right now, and how can I manage and how can I pace within my, I suppose the term would be energy envelope, but Rachel puts
Right.
it so well in her writing that yeah, I really appreciated that, and I can relate to that an awful lot.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I think there's a cruelty in people telling us that it is our job to hope to get better,
mm,
because that forces us to believe that our lives are not meaningful now. Our lives are not meaningful unless we're fighting some kind of war against an illness that doesn't really care what we're doing, except that it's going to punish us if we overdo it, and it's going to punish us if we stress ourselves out, and it's going to punish us if we're putting all our efforts into an empty promise. And
mm,
so yeah, I think it's cruel of people to tell us that we have to think positive. I It's cruel of people to tell us that we have to believe we'll get better. um and what for me is like the people who are most supportive in my life are people who just accept that I'm sick and just spend nice connecty time with me, where um, there's no expectation that my life is going to change and that I'm going to change. And I do have a few friends who don't have chronic illness who are able to do that. A lot of my friends, I can tell, like, they'll be like, "Are you better? You look better. Are you better?" Like every time I see them, or like I recently told some friends that, I have mast cell activation syndrome. There's not a lot of foods I can eat, and I was able to add a few more foods to my diet, and they're like, "Oh, did that make you better?" It's like I have a lot of friends who don't really realize, or not a lot, but I have some friends who don't realize that they're constantly pushing this sort of narrative of hope onto me, that they can't just sit with and accept that I'm sick. And the friends who are like, "You look good, you look great, are you better?" And it's, I think that I think, again, for a lot of people, when they do this, they mean well, but it's actually really kind of exhausting, and can be devastating when you don't have people in your life who are just like able to meet you where you're at and able to accept and sit with you in the reality that you have a devastating illness that's, probably not going to get better, and that they're not helping by putting that kind of pressure and expectation on you. It's like they want, when people do that, I feel like they want something from me. And the thing that they want is for me to comfort them by telling them that I'm going to be better, that I'm better. It's like people want comfort from you because you being sick makes them feel vulnerable. They don't want to feel vulnerable. They don't want to feel like it can happen to them. And so they're like trying to push this narrative onto you. And then I just find it exhausting and the opposite of comforting. And I'm really grateful for my friends with chronic illness who can just sit with me where I am. And some of my friends without chronic illness who also can just sit with me where I am. And, yeah.
And I think like having a sense of acceptance doesn't mean that you don't want to get better either. And I think that's another thing. It's like I think we all want to be better. We all want a different life, and a healthy life. But we have to accept the situation that we're in. So I'd love to be in a situation where I could go back to work and be whatever job that would be, and earning money and doing things and traveling, and I would love to be able to do those things again. But I have to accept that for the time being anyway, for however long it will be, until whether a treatment or a cure is found. We're kind of like we're waiting, or we're just trying to manage our energy levels to get to a place that we do see some improvement, if that is the case. And it's not easy, is it? And there's no easy answers to any of it. And it would be nice to kind of like give some encouragement or some assurances, or to people listening that things will improve, and we have to kind of live in the reality of the situation. And I think sometimes it can be healthy to feel, to kind of express that frustration at times, and some of us do that through poetry and through I write angry songs sometimes, and but and the creativity, we haven't sort of touched on creativity again today, but we'll kind of get to that as well. But yeah,
It's not our job to be positive. It's not our job to be happy about being sick. It's not our job to comfort other people because our being sick makes them uneasy or uncomfortable or afraid. It's not our job to kind of be inspiration porn to the world. And what is our job? I think taking the best care of ourselves we can is I mean, I wouldn't say it's our job, but it's like, I think for me, I really focus on, how can I maximize my quality of life in this particular situation? Uh, and, some days I'm not going to be able to, some days, I guess what an interesting topic that we might talk about another time is like, what does it look like to grieve the lives we lost if we weren't, some people don't remember a life before chronic illness, but for those of us who had a better quality of life and then lost that quality of life, like what does it look like to grieve that? And what does it look like to sort of try to manage our illness in a way that allows us the best quality of life that we can have? And it's different for everyone. But yeah.
Yeah. We were gonna do the advert today, but it feels maybe a bit like flippant and a bit silly to do an absurdist advert after quite a deep, heavy
Yeah.
conversation. So what I'll do is I'll record the advert and we'll put that out as a short or something separately. But it might be nice to finish with a poem that
Can you read
Sarah
it?
Worsley, who does the guitarist group on Facebook for people with ME and long COVID. She posted a poem this week, and it's about hope, and maybe it'll be useful just to process after our conversation, because we've had quite a heavy conversation today, and I hope
Yeah.
people after listening kind of take time to just do some self-care as well, and look after yourselves, and find some light relief. But
Yeah, maybe
this
people, I know Dan, maybe if people want to write in and talk about things that they do that feel comforting to them. I don't know. Do you think that's
yeah,
if
yeah,
there's activities that you can do that are very low key, or, like, I don't know, if for me, it's like I find listening to what I call comfort food audiobooks. Like, that is something that I do almost every day, sometimes all day. That's all I can do, but it brings me a lot of comfort. So I don't know if people want to share small things that bring them comfort that are not magical thinking. Um, we don't really want to. We're not really in the business of magical thinking. Um,
yeah. I'll read this poem, and then yeah, it's I hope life waits for me. So yeah, it's a poem that kind of like is looking forwards, but it's also grounded in reality as well. I hope life waits for me when I am able to rejoin in love and music, friendship and celebration. I hope life waits for me when I am able to feel the shock of cold water while the sun warms my skin. I hope life waits for me when I am able to feel ground underfoot and the joy of mobilization, of discovery. I hope life waits for me while I wait for research, for science, for funding, and for hope. I hope life waits for me while I wait for relief from pain, from illness, from unspoken suffering. I hope life waits for me while I wait for a body I can count on, for healing, for elusive, so elusive. I hope life waits for me while I wait for light after darkness, sound after silence. While kids grow up and parents age and missed occasions stab my skin, I long for life to wait for me. And she says, for all suffering from ME and CFS, long COVID and chronic illness. And thank you, Sarah, for letting us use that. And it feels like an appropriate place to kind of end off our episode. And I'm aware we've kind of gone quite long again today. We didn't intend to, but after all the technical issues we had, I think it's been a good conversation. So yeah,
yeah,
have you got
thanks,
anything else you
Dan,
wanted
and
to add,
thanks
Dov?
everyone.
Yeah.
Hmm?
Have you got anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, I just wanted to thank everyone for listening, and I know that this probably wasn't, the easiest podcast, and I imagine that some people are, um, you know, I think in one way or another, probably we've all been in places of magical thinking in our lives, and it's not, again, it's not a clear cut concept. It's kind of fluid, and not always easy to define or to point to, but yeah, just want to make it clear that we're not, our intent is not um, to judge, but to say
Mm.
that, like, this kind of thinking does, I think, a lot more harm than good. And again, I understand where it comes from, for a lot of people. But this is us talking about our experiences and our belief systems and our ways of trying to sit with and manage, daily life with disabling ME. But yeah, so thank you for listening, and hope that you're, able to have as okay of a day as you can, and yeah.
We'll speak to you next time. Thanks, everybody. Bye. stop.
I just wanted to clarify, since Dan and I are talking about trauma and trauma work, that we are not saying that there are no benefits to trauma work, and we're not saying that trauma doesn't affect people. What we are calling into question, and what we do see as troubling, is this idea that trauma is the sole cause of illness, and that, quote, fixing trauma will, quote, fix illness. Trauma may be a factor in making some people more vulnerable to certain kinds of illness. Any kind of stress can be a factor in making people more vulnerable to illness. And doing trauma work, I think, can be, doing trauma work, the things that trauma work can do is it can help people reduce their reactivity to triggers. It can reduce anxiety. It can reduce stress. It can improve relationships. It can improve quality of life. But what it can't do is fix a complex chronic illness. So yeah, I just wanted to be clear that I think therapy is great. I think doing trauma work is great, and I'm not saying that we're not trying to downplay how meaningful it can be to do that kind of work. We're just trying to put into perspective the relationship between trauma and trauma work, and persistent chronic illness. And yeah, there's lots more I could say on that, but I just wanted to do a short little addendum. So hope you're all managing as well as can be.